This is the first screencast of two on William Carlos Williams for week 6. And I asked you to read Landscape with a Fall of Icarus. This is just to say in the red wheelbarrow. And so we're going to talk about two of those poems in this first screencast, and then we'll move on to another screencast to discuss the other one. And so I picked the two shorter ones that we're going to talk about first. And so I took a class on modernist literature in college, and I can remember the first time I ever encountered Williams, and my teacher was so passionate about this guy, and I was like, "What's the big deal?" Because I didn't really, I was not reading from really the right perspective, and going back and really approaching it now, like I see there's so much that can be unpacked from some of these seemingly meaningless poems. They pack a lot of punch, and we've talked about that. We've talked about that ability that writers have to just really pack in a lot of meaning into really succinct poems and verse and text. So William Carlos Williams really was not interested in convention. He really sought freedom from that, and he didn't like those confining forms and patterns. And he was also a prominent figure in the branch of modernist poetry that was called Imagist or Imagism, which meant that they used a lot of really clear language and really focused on an appreciation of like ordinary scenes and images. And so much of what he writes is very characteristic of that imagism there in modernist poetry. And so the Red Wheelbarrow, taking a look at it, you're looking at it and you're like, how can you pull that much meaning out of, four stanzas? We're talking about 8 lines, and there are they even really lines, here? But there's so much. It's very simple. It's very deceptive. So you got 4 stanzas. You have 2 couplets there. It's written in free verse, so that means there's no set pattern, no rhyme, no set pattern of rhyme, I'm sorry, or meter. Simple diction. There's a very casual tone. It's very calm. He doesn't use any punctuation, and he doesn't use any capitalization. And so that seems of itself to suggest that a lack of importance. When we capitalize something, we want people to stand up and take note and pay attention to it. So the lack of the lack of capitalization sometimes denotes a lack of importance, but that's definitely not what's going on here. The structure is very consistent. It's very reliable throughout. So every first line of the stanza is 3 words, and then every second line of the stanza is 1 word. Okay, so I want you to keep that form in the back of your mind as we're kind of going through. We're going to break it down. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. And you're like, Miss Lloyd, you gotta be crazy. Like, there's nothing to this poem. But there's so much. And he even says it there in the first line, so much depends upon the wheelbarrow. So we tend to overlook a wheelbarrow, right? We see it out in the yard, and you may have one in your shed. You may not even have one at all. I don't really know like where you live, but we tend to overlook at it. We look at it and we kind of dismiss it. But a wheelbarrow is really so versatile, and it can be used for so many things. And I think that's he's making that is a parallel to something much larger, and we'll talk about that as we kind of go along. So he begins literally with iterating that so much depends upon this wheelbarrow. Oddly enough, he uses the word upon instead of on. So much depends on a red wheelbarrow. And so that's kind of like it's elevating the concept of this wheelbarrow to another level. So, all your good fairy tales start with once upon a time there. So the use of upon it's kind of elevating it to another level, making us pay attention a little bit more to something that we normally would not pay attention to, we would normally overlook. It's also important to note the color red there. Now, a red is a perfectly common color for a wheelbarrow. I've seen red wheelbarrows and green wheelbarrows, black wheelbarrows. They're common colors, but typically we associate the color red with things that stand out, right? So stop signs, red lights, fire trucks. I can remember a student I had in ninth grade when I first started teaching, and she always wore bright red lipstick. And I always paid attention to that because, like, you gotta have some confidence to wear some bright red lipstick, right? Red draws attention. But red's that typical color for wheelbarrows. And when we stick a wheelbarrow in front of a red barn, it blends in and it's easy to overlook. In that second stanza, he purposely separates red wheelbarrow into three words, red wheelbarrow. And that's to fit his form, that consistent form that I was talking about, where every first line of the stanza is three words, and then the second line is the one word. And so he's doing that to fit his form, and he's seeming to suggest that the wheelbarrow can be made into the right tool, even when it logically isn't a perfect fit. So in stanzas 3 and 4, that starts with the glaze with rainwater, we have we're reminded that the wheelbarrow is often disregarded. We leave it out in the elements, right? We leave it out of the shed. It gets rained on. It can rust. The wheels can rot. However, the word that he uses is not soaked or wet or drenched. He uses the word glazed with rainwater. So glaze has a connotation of being shiny, right? Some glazed pottery. It has a glimmery sheen to it. This wheelbarrow is not just red and ordinary. It's shining, and it's likely to gain attention, or we should pay attention to it. However, then he switches to beside the white chickens. Well, your eye, when you're looking in the yard and you see a wheelbarrow sitting there, your eye would naturally be drawn to the white, bright white chickens that are moving about the yard. So again, it tends to get overlooked, which is interesting because the wheelbarrow could be used to tend the chickens. You can haul the feed, you can clean the pens with the wheelbarrow, but so much depends upon it. You'll also notice that there's no punctuation at the end of the poem, which authors typically do. It signifies different things. But this seems to suggest that this is a cycle, right? It doesn't end. It's going to continue. We're going to continue the wheelbarrow is going to continue to make so many aspects of our lives possible because it's reliable, it's trustworthy, just like his pattern here. It allows for rural and farm people to make a living and support their families day to day, but we don't think of it like that. We're going to unappreciate it and we're going to overlook it because it's just that way. Applying this to a larger picture, because we're not really just talking about the wheelbarrow. Some of the most crucial elements in our lives can go overlooked. The things and the items and the people that make it possible for us to go about our day to day lives. That wheelbarrow on a farm is a critical tool, and yet it's often overlooked and unappreciated. So, Williams is seeming to suggest for us to kind of look for the things and the people that truly matter that make it possible for us to live our lives and to make sure that we don't take them for granted. So much depends upon those things. Okay, switching gears, this is just to say, so the rumor is that this was actually a note that Williams left for his wife on their icebox, which is like an old-timey word for a refrigerator, one morning when he was leaving the house. And when it was published in 1934, it became one of his like most famous poems. Let's take a look at it. Let's read it, and then we'll talk about it. So this is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. Um, Seemingly kind of mundane, right? We have no regular rhythm or syllable pattern. There's no rhyme, no punctuation other than the line breaks, obviously, and those gaps. Remember, we talked about, pay attention to the gaps as they can signify all different kinds of things. I'm sorry if you hear that background noise. The bell has signal period change, and so the kids are noisy going by. Um, So true to his philosophy, right? He's throwing away that convention, he's freeing up the line, and he's writing a poem literally about anything. His kind of concept that there are no ideas but in things. Rooted in reality with that strong imagery, we talked about that being a concept of modernism. Just a few words that are neatly arranged that pack in so much meaning, or no meaning. You get to decide, right? That's part of that ambiguity. Read through straight, it takes about 20 seconds or less to recite. It seems like a little bit of a confession, and if you think about it as a note he left for his wife, it's definitely that. Hey, sorry I ate your plums. I couldn't resist and forgive me. But when we take a step back from it and we take a look, there's so much more that's kind of going on kind of beneath the surface. You know, who could the speaker be confessing to? Is it about plums, or is it a metaphor for something else? You know, maybe it was intended for just one person, but it's really universal in the way that it can be read. So, you know, we talked about him seeking freedom from restraint and that whole idea of imagism and being an imagist poet. Those ordinary scenes and images. You know, the poem is it's very short, personal confession maybe, but there's so much that you can read below deeper. You can think about broader ideas like temptation, guilt? Is it about love or lust or sex or just whatever? Like there are things that you can read into it that are multifaceted. Some suggest even like the Garden of Eden, how Eve ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil. This is like the sixth or seventh time that we've talked about that in 202, I think, this year. But you know, is it that? Is it any of those things? Or is it just simply a celebration of life's simple pleasures? Is it just a confessional poem to his wife, you know, hey, I'm sorry, I ate your plums that you were saving. I ate your leftovers, you know, apologies. So, you know, that's part of that whole ambiguous nature of so much of literature that makes it so special. Like, you know, what is the broader concept that he's, you know, going for there. So, you know, you can decide how you want to read that. I'm going to pick up in the next screencast and we're going to talk about landscape with the fall of Icarus.